Hello, and we are live. Okay, so I'm Alexis Littleboy, and I'm speaking with Estelle Williams. And today we are talking about all sorts of lovely things. Estelle is the woman that you cannot box in. Labels cannot define her. She is totally out of this world. So, Estelle, what would you like to speak about? Because I know you are amazing talking about astrology and magic and ritual, well, sometimes ritual, but tarot, publishing. You have some amazing projects underway.
Yes.
Dream interpretation, which has definitely been very interesting. So what would you like to share about today?
Okay, so I guess I do dip my toes into a lot of different areas depending on what I'm interested in at the time, and I have been getting quite a lot back into my astrology, and in particular not astrology as a whole, but as in little vignettes of different types of astrology readings that I do for clients, which is depending on a particular theme in their life or a particular area of their life. So, for example, I do relationship readings, I do soul purpose readings, they're very popular. I also do the whole astrological reading. I do birthday readings, for example, which takes you on a journey from the day of your birthday to for the year ahead, and that relates to where the sun comes back to your original place in your birth chart. So if it was at 15 degrees Aries, then when it comes back to that, the sun travels around the chart and comes back to that point. That's your birthday reading. So it goes for not from January to December, but in that case it would be going from April to April, for example. So that's another popular one. So I do a whole range of them, and the reason that I do them in that way is that sometimes the information that you can get, or actually always the information you can get from an astrology chart, is just so much information, and it can be quite overwhelming. What I find is that people don't really latch onto and remember the things that are going on, or the themes that are coming up, because there's just so many of them and so much different information. So it's really useful to boil it down into little areas. So if you look at people's lives, usually they're having success in certain areas, and then maybe one or two areas that aren't working for them. So we can actually look into the astrology chart and what's going on there, what the themes are and what their preponderances are and their preferences and the way that they respond in certain reactions. It all comes up in the astrology chart. So we can look at that and say, hey, maybe, try this strategy instead of doing the way that you're doing, because that's your natural way to respond. So it's just finding things that are actually useful and practical to put into people's lives through astrology. And there is so much information that you can get from the astrology chart. It's quite uncanny. So yeah, that's where I'm at the moment.
Yeah, so do you use those tools for yourself as well, like on a personal level?
Yes, of course. I mean, I think you have to do that. So, one of the things that I do is I run a group for women, which is called the Wish Club, and the Wish Club is where we use the cycles of the moon, for example. So we start with the new moon. We create our wishes based on a specific formula, which I teach in the Wish Club, and then it's wording the wishes, it's the energy behind them, the intention behind them, and so on. And then at the full moon, we get together again and see what's happened with our wishes, if they come true. Sharing what things have manifested for us, and if they haven't come true, or do they still feel good? Do we need to reword them a little bit, or is there something else that we can do? So we use the moon in that way, and that's an example from astrology where we actually take one point and use that for a specific purpose. So we can actually pick apart. We don't actually have to look at the universe and the astrology chart as one big chunk. We can actually break it down into little useful pieces and take those away with us and get a predefined or actually a purposeful result by looking at these helpful bits of information that show up in your chart. So yeah, and it's a lot of fun too. The other thing that I'm getting into with my astrology is the experiential astrology. So what we look at in astrology is a whole range of different archetypes. So the planets, if we look at planets as an archetype, and an archetype is simply a pattern. So a pattern of behaviour, a pattern of experience that's common to humankind. So, you know, for example, if we look at the planets, we have the sun. The sun is the archetype for the self and the ego. The moon is an archetype for the soul and what our soul needs to feel nourished and to feel safe and to feel whole. And then we have Mercury. It's an archetype for our communication, the way that we communicate with people. And then Venus is, you know, what we do to give ourselves pleasure, whether that's, you know, in the love angle, or if it's just, you know, wearing nice clothes, wearing nice perfume, eating nice food, taking care of ourselves in that way. And then, you know, and it goes on. So if we look at each of those planets and the mythical god that it's named after. So, for example, with Mercury is the Roman god of communication, and he was the messenger of the gods, and he's also the keeper of the portal, and, you know, he's a guide of souls, the psychopomp, and all those sorts of things. So it's with experiential astrology, it's actually getting the client to embody those energies, so that and in the way that's shown up in their astrology chart, so that they can really connect with that and make changes where they feel they need changes, or just appreciate how multidimensional they are just by looking at all these different points. And there's a lot of things you can do, but once you experience those energies and embody them, they cease to be just a construct of the mind and something that we're talking about. They actually feel the energy moving through their body, and that is so powerful and such an amazing thing to witness, to do that.
Yeah, so it's really embodying those energies and not just, with the whole theory, and then actually bringing it down and experiencing it. So that's what you mean by the experiential.
Yeah, and it's especially useful for the kinesthetic types. So, you know, a visual type, you can certainly visualise, and I think 40% of the population are visual. So, but 40% are also kinesthetic. So when we talk about a kinesthetic experience, it's that embodying. And often people that don't get the visual side, you know, when we say, can you visualise this or imagine that or whatever, imagination is a good word. Visualisation isn't always so helpful with people that can't visualise or tell themselves they can't visualise.
Yeah.
So getting to that body experience, that kinesthetic experience, is really important in terms of being able to experience the energies in a way that's going to transform them and be useful for them too.
Yeah, so the difference between visualization and imagination, that's almost like a key trigger. And like,
yeah, well, you know, if we look at visualization is that visual cortex and the ability to see something that you've seen before. It's like a memory.
Yeah.
Whereas imagination is something that you've never seen before, so you have to construct it. But the beautiful thing about imagination as a word is that imagination doesn't mean that it has to be visual. It can be auditory. You can imagine a sound. You can imagine a picture for sure. But you can also imagine a feeling. You can imagine a shape, a texture, you know, any of the senses you use for imagination. So often it's, you know, instead of using the word visualization, even though visualizing is something that you have seen, if we use imagination in that sort of context and cross-contextualize it and then make it into, well, how do you like to perceive information? How do you imagine? When you imagine something, you know, is it through the feeling sense? Is it through the visual sense? Is it auditory? Is it, you know, auditory digital, which is the logical sense? So, you know, and a lot of kinesthetic people are actually auditory digital as well. So they need it for it to make sense in a logical way for them to be able to feel it or to experience it. So there's all these different modes that you can bring in, and it's not just, then it becomes like a meta astrology. It's beyond astrology. It's all, you're bringing in all this other stuff as well, which is, you know, and the other thing that you bring in with astrology is the symbolism. And a symbol is really a magical thing, because it's a metaphor. A symbol is a metaphor, and the brain loves metaphors. The brain loves to take in information in metaphors, which isn't logical. It transcends logic. It actually goes through many, many different layers and can mean many different things. So if you look at the symbols that we see in the world today, so if you look at the cross, if you look at the swastika, they don't just mean a cross or a swastika. They'll bring in a whole heap of different meanings, you know, depending on your experience, but also depending on the collective unconscious experience, which we all tap into. So, you know, there's a lot of power in being able to use these symbols, metaphors, and other things as not only teaching tools, what you want to create in your life, because you are the creator of your life. I'm the creator of my life, and it gets all into that. It starts to become enmeshed. So when we look at that as a matrix of experience and our reality, our dreams, our memories, all of these things can be brought forward through the use of metaphors. We tap into all those, through a symbol or a metaphor. So yeah, it's a really powerful change tool.
So with the symbolism, is that something that the energies or the meanings have changed over time, and is it what is in the collective now as to what we associate that symbol with, or does our unconscious recognize it for what it's true?
I think it. Oh, sorry, you're breaking up.
That's okay. Can you see me?
Yes. Yeah, your voice stopped though, so yeah.
Like with the symbolism, is the unconscious like meaning for it now, is that the same as what its true meaning is, like what that symbol was originally, or is it something that's been perhaps changed by the collective with the experience over time? What's your thoughts?
Well, I think, yeah, it's a good question. I think really it has to evolve. I think the collective unconscious evolves as we evolve. So, for example, those two symbols, the cross, obviously, that resonates with Christianity, and that sort of that practice of Jesus on the cross, or it predates that as well, because the cross is actually part of it's the cross of matter.
Yeah.
So it actually predates Christianity even. So what we then have is these symbols are actually transmuted from one tradition to another tradition. And the other one that I mentioned was the swastika. So the swastika is actually an ancient Hindu symbol, and that has been appropriated in the 20th century by Nazi Germany, and that's what most people think of when they think of the swastika. They think it's an evil symbol, but that was done very intentionally, I believe, by those people to take a symbol that was already embedded in the psyche and actually use their own purposes, but nefarious purposes, not altruistic purposes, as it turns out. So so it's very interesting. It also brings up how people how religions actually can make their religion they actually transpose their religion on top of an existing pagan religion, so to speak, and make their religion very successful. Is that they do that by using the symbols in the original religion or the original belief system and transmuting them for their own purposes. And this is where you get all the saints of the Catholic tradition. So they're very successful in South American countries, for example, where they've taken the Christian symbols and put them on top of, so instead of having the gods of all the South American, the Mayan and the Aztec and all that, they actually have now saints. So the saints are often married with, because they have a similar energy, and it's very easy for them to actually transplant it. So now you've actually transmuted that original pagan religion into what we call a modern religion. And whether that's for good or ill, I'm not here to decide that. So it's just a history of what's happened. So it's very interesting though. But I think there is still the original seed of the meaning of that symbol, and then we tend to use it depending on what our intention is and what our focus is and what we're trying to achieve as a culture or a organisation or a religion or whatever. It's done very intentionally, and it's with an understanding that the connection of the psyche with that original symbol exists.
It's very interesting, isn't
it? Yeah.
I wanted to go back to astrology because I find it fascinating. I really don't have a lot of knowledge about it. I was just thinking, is there different strains of astrology? Like, do you have Chinese astrology? Do you have Western astrology? What what can you explain a little bit more, like really basics for me?
Okay. Okay, well, yeah, so basically, I mean, obviously we know we've got a Chinese astrology, so we've got the 12 animals, and the Chinese tradition goes back a very long way. I'm not even going to guess at how many thousands of years, that it's that we know about. But then you've also got sidereal astrology, which is the Indian astrology. And you'll find that with sidereal astrology, it actually follows the precession of the equinoxes with their points. So if you were born as a Piscean in traditional, like what the astrology that I do, which is more sort of, we call it traditional astrology, or Western astrology, I should say, as opposed to Eastern. So with Western astrology, we actually have, if you're born on the 21st of, well, let's say not the 21st, if you're born on the 15th of March, you're a Pisces. But if you're born on the 15th of March in Indian astrology, you're not necessarily a Pisces, because it actually follows the precession of the equinoxes. So instead of it being a fixed point, it actually moves. And the precession of the equinoxes is a very interesting point in history as well, because it goes, it's where the North Pole, the axis of the North Pole points in terms of the constellations that we know. So where that's pointing to is actually going backwards through, as we go forward in time, it goes backwards through the constellation, or what we call backwards, because we're trained to think from Aries to Pisces. So it's actually going, at the moment we're still in the age of Pisces. We're very soon to move into the age of Aquarius, which is the sign before Pisces. So that gives you an indication of the movement of this axis, and that's where that comes from. So it lasts about 2,600 years through each sign. This wobble, we'll call it a wobble, goes through the axis, because it sort of goes like that. So if you imagine the Earth's around here and this is a wobbling, then the South Pole is wobbling, sort of, Anyway, I'm not very good at explaining that, but it basically takes 2,600 years, and that's not precise. That's depending on a lot of things, to go backwards through each sign. So we've just spent the last 2,000 odd years going through Pisces. And that was precipitated by, I guess, the Christian movement. And that is one reason why Christ is shown as a fish symbol. Mm-hmm. And one of his was ichthys, which is the Latin for fish. So when we go back through, we go back through to Aquarius then. So then Aquarius, that's going to last 2,600 years before we move into the age of Capricorn. So then, we're sort of going through, and I'm not going to talk about the whole meaning of that per se, but it generally takes about 30,000 years, we'll say 26,000 to 30,000 years to go through a whole cycle. Now, the interesting thing is, if you try and tell anyone that the civilizations on the Earth are any older than maybe 10,000 years, that, you're going to get a lot of... Yeah. My contention is that civilizations are a lot older than that, because of this ability to count. And for me, it makes sense that we've been through at least one cycle of it's called a great year. We've been through one cycle of that, so that's 30,000 years, give or take. And then, there's probably multiples of those. So, I think there's a lot of information that's being withheld from us, or that's not understood, or, and I think a lot of it is the hubris of the scientific world. They think they know everything because they can prove it. And I think, this is interesting, because when we look at those sorts of data that we understand, that we know of, and all the stuff that we don't know of, we can only presume that there's a lot of other stuff there. We can only follow clues to get that information. So, there is a lot that is yet to come out, but it's very interesting, and I think it's very exciting when we think about how old this, not only the Earth but the civilizations of the Earth are, and I don't think anyone can say yes, this is the absolute truth, because nobody knows. So my perception is, let's just have an inquiring mind around this. Let's not pretend that we have all the answers and that we know everything, because we don't. And why would you want to? I mean, that is hubris.
Takes the mystery out, doesn't it? If we knew everything.
Yeah, and it's almost like, you know, we want to know all the secrets of nature, but, you know, we're not meant to know all the secrets, because, you know, what's the thing about a secret? The minute that it's out, you know, the cat's out of the bag, you've lost the, you know, you've lost the spice of life. You've lost the joy of discovery. You've lost, you know, who wants to know everything? They say that too much knowledge makes you old. You know, so sometimes it's better to approach life with the innocence of a child, and you know, the lack of pretension that a child has.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things. So I'm all up for new discoveries coming out all the time. I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, definitely. So with astrology and the traditional one that you follow,
Yes.
is mythology really deeply connected? Like, especially the Greek and the Roman mythology, like, is that something that's deeply connected? Because you were talking about Mercury before, and
Yes.
so
Yeah. Well, yeah. So if we look at mythology, and we're looking at the moment, we're looking at Roman mythology. So, but we also can look at the Greek mythology, because there's a lot of parallels between the gods and goddesses and the Romans. You know, it's almost, you know, one for one with that, and they've obviously adopted, the Romans obviously adopted their mythology from the Greeks. But, you know, for whatever reason, we've got the names of our planets in astronomy, astrology, are the Romans. So the Romans won in terms of naming them, I guess. But with Mercury's, you have the Greek counterpart, which is Hermes. And, you know, you go through your planets, and you've got, and that was, it's interesting because the energies that are ascribed to each planet are very much to do with, you know, when you look at astrology and the charts, you look at a birth chart all the time. You know, birth chart is a map of the sky at the time you were born, or the time you took your first breath. So, and that resonates with Carl Jung's idea of synchronicity, so that it's like the essence of the moment, or the germs of the moment. They call them germs, that, or seeds. So germs as in germination,
yeah.
of seeds. The seeds of the moment are actually embodied in that moment, and you are part of that moment. So by synchronicity, you embody that moment in time as well. So I got a bit sidetracked there, as I do. So with the traditional astrology, this is going to be funny because my mind's gone completely blank.
That's all good. I love a bit of Roman mythology. Throw it in.
Oh, yes, so the gods, yes. So with the Roman mythology, okay, so with the seeds of the moment. So you look at what happens is the essence of that moment in time, when, you know, the planets were in a certain alignment or a misalignment, or whatever was going on in the sky at the moment, gives, you know, takes on the energy of that moment. The people that are born at that moment take on that energy. But what's interesting is that when you look at what we call Mercury and how we relate that to communication, our communication style, the way that we interface with the world and people around us and all that sort of thing, what's really interesting is that, if, you know, it's just so spot on, then how ancient really is this practice of astrology that marries those ideas to a planet, and it's just so true, because they've been observing it for a very, very, very long time. And then if you look at the whole, you know, the whole sky, you know, the night sky, or the, you know, the universe, or the galaxies, and, you know, all those points that we call stars, and what we call them, you know, a lot of those are all being named after the Greek gods or the Roman gods, and there's stories, and, you know, you could just imagine the ancient man was sitting there looking up at the sky and just telling all these stories that, you know, and it's also try and say the word mnemonic. So it's sort of like seeing the pictures in the stars instead of just all these disconnected dots. Actually making them connected and making them stories actually allowed them to remember their own stories, their own tales, and also to understand their universe and their world. And, you know, it's sort of the idea that the Greek gods put certain heroes up into the stars, and they were named after them because they knew that they know how eternal the stars are. So if you were lucky enough to be placed in the stars, in the heavens, then your legacy would live on forever, because people would always talk about it. So it's very interesting, all those things. And then we've got asteroids. We've got our other different points. So the asteroid goddesses, for example, are really important part of astrology. And the reason that is because the Romans and the Greeks, obviously being patriarchal societies, the female, feminine energies were given second fiddle, basically, or made second fiddle to the gods. So, and often, they were reduced in terms of their functions, were, sort of almost disparaged and put down. So their functions are not quite as important as the male functions. But then if you look at what's missing in an astrology chart, so the astrology chart, even though we do split it equally into masculine, feminine energies, the actual planets themselves, there's only Venus is the only female goddess in that whole pantheon that we use. So what the asteroid goddesses do is actually, if we they've named the asteroid goddesses Ceres after Demeter, Juno, Hera, Pallas Athene or Athena, Hestia or Vesta, and there's other minor asteroid goddesses as well. We'll call them minor because they're not quite so prominent, and we can't use every point in the sky, let's face it, otherwise we'd all go mad trying to make meaning out of it all. But what those asteroid goddesses do, we can plot them in a natal chart as well and bring a lot more feminine energy in and make the picture more complete, which is really, really nice thing to do, especially if you're reading the chart for a woman.
Yeah.
But also, if you're reading a chart for an awakened man who's in touch with his feminine side, then that's actually a good thing to do as well. So, it's pretty exciting, and it just goes to show you that you can use so many different things in a chart that it's just, what do you want to know?
Yeah.
Just formulate your question. It's all there. The answer's all there.
Yeah, beautiful, eh? Which leads me into honestly, listening to you sometimes is like boom, boom, boom. Wow, this is just a sea of knowledge and wisdom that comes out.
Yeah.
Where do I go with that? Which leads me into magic, and which for me, everything's magic. So, and then you know a little bit about law of attraction and that kind of thing as well. So,
yeah.
You are a lady who knows a lot of things. So,
Yes.
I do love chatting to you. So, with actually, feng shui is actually jumping out at me because I know you know a bit about that too. Which,
well,
me,
I'm not
astrology and feng shui kind of they kind of like have their connections in my head anyway.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because for me, like astrology and feng shui are quite ancient, and it's like this knowledge that's kind of come up and is almost foundational that, if you know a little bit about this, like feng shui is all about energy and placement of material, like things in the actual physical environment, but they also have this massive effect energetically that, you don't necessarily see it, but you can feel it, or, whatever people do with energy. So, what are your thoughts on feng shui?
Well, feng shui is really, really interesting, and I think it's interesting that you brought up law of attraction before that, because I think they are very, I won't say very similar, because in their application they're completely different. But the whole idea of, and if you look at if we look at the alchemists, for example, they're always looking for this base metal, and the base metal that they thought it was lead, so they'd actually sort of break everything down into lead. And then of course we had the scientists in the 19th century, in the 20th century, going to the atom, breaking everything down to the point of the atom, and they're thinking that that's it. But then you've got the quantum physicists who's saying, oh no, it's particles or it's waves, and a wave is a wave until it becomes a particle, and if you observe it, it does something different, and all this sort of thing. So what we're actually looking at as a base material is energy.
Yeah.
And energy runs through everything. So, you know, the astrology, the tarot, the, you know, the mundane sort of sciences, even everything, you know, the table that, you know, I'm sitting at, the chair that I'm sitting on, it's all energy and all those sorts of things. So, you know, really nobody can say, if you accept that the base material is energy, then nobody can say that anything that exists in the world is right or wrong. It just exists and it's energy. So, you know, instead of getting into this whole argument with, you know, what is this and what is that and prove it and all that sort of thing, just understand that you're energy. Everything around you is energy. Your thoughts are energy, and everything can be influenced by the energetic placement of things. So feng shui is really the energetic placement or the energetic signature of your living space, for example, and they have different ways of describing things. So they have their symbolism. So they have the dragon, they have the, you know, the tiger, they have the tortoise, and the way that they describe the placement of, you know, where your house is, have a mountain at your back and a river in front of you is a really positive thing to have. Make sure you've got good chi flowing, not too strong but not too weak. You know, the chi is energy, obviously, so the feng shui is very much about the chi and the movement of the chi in your physical space. So how do they, you know, and of course and I can't tell you how old feng shui is. I mean, there will be people out there that have theories and will tell you that it started here and it started there. Well, who knows, you know, and I don't care. I know that it works and it is something that everybody can utilise. It's just a matter of having an open mind and a willingness to learn something new, because it is something new. And, you know, it's sort of just have a fundamental understanding of directions. Directions are very important in feng shui, and they have meanings with the directions. And then, you know, you talked before about Chinese astrology, and Chinese astrology has what they call flying star or flying stars in feng shui, and the flying stars are like transits in our Western astrological tradition. So with the flying star, that changes. Actually, that you have a flying star chart for the year. Starting at the Chinese New Year, you have a flying star chart for the day that you're in, and it changes for the week and the month. And so you know, these things are always moving, and it's actually easy to see that, like with astrology, you can easily get overwhelmed with all this data that's available. So it's much better to focus in on something that, you know, what are you going through at the moment. If you're going to use feng shui, don't try and sort of learn it all at once, because you're just going to get overwhelmed. But what are your challenges at the moment? What things are challenging you, and what sort of areas in feng shui or astrology or, you know, whatever, what advice do they have for that particular function or that particular mode or that particular remedy? So it's like, if you're suffering with your finances, you say, okay, let's have a look at my money corner in feng shui. What's going on there? Oh, yes, I've got it completely cluttered. And the first time I came across feng shui was probably about 20 years ago. And for some reason, because I'm a bit kooky like that, I love, you know, anything that's a bit off the wall and out there, and, you know, people go, oh, that's, you know, hocus pocus or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I'll have a look. So, you know, I love all that stuff. So I got a book on feng shui and I looked at it. And the place that I was living at the time, my money corner, which is just the traditional feng shui, it's not any 8 mansions or any of those other schools of thought with feng shui, but it was just the basic, you know, here's a grid, top left-hand corner is your money corner, what's going on there? I actually had a spare room there, and it was just chock-a-block full of junk. So much stuff in everything that I didn't have room for, but I didn't have the heart to throw away. And my husband's a bit of a bowerbird as well, so he collects things and never wants to throw anything out. So I've got this room that's stuffed full of junk and stuff that's just in boxes. It's never been unpacked. So the good thing about my husband is I say to him something like, you know, it's really bad energy in there, we have to fix the feng shui. He's going, okay, what do you need me to do? So he's like really up for it too. So I just said, okay, we need to clean this room out. The minute that we did that and got rid of all the clutter and made it into a functioning room, I think I used it as a sewing room, then suddenly, you know, everything started working with our finances. So I know that was, you know, that was a direct result of me working on that. It wasn't sort of something that I made up or something that, you know, wishful fulfillment or whatever.
Yeah.
But it was, so, and I've always tried to keep a link to that ever since, of that idea ever since. So I now have a beautiful water feature at my front door. As I look out onto the street, it's on my left-hand side. You don't want to put one on your right-hand side unless you want your husband or your partner to have a second family. So, there's all these little things that you pick up with the feng shui as well. So, the little idea, you just take on little things at the time and see how they work. Does that work for me? If it doesn't work for me, is there something else going on? And just, test and measure, I think. So we do take a bit of a scientific method when we're trying out all these things. We don't just take it on blind faith. If it works for you, then adopt it. If it doesn't work for you, then drop it, and be curious about something else that may work for you. So there's always something that you can do in your life to make improvements. And we're here to grow. We're not here to sit there and stagnate like a plant and hope somebody throws a bit of water on us every now and then.
And that's really good about like having those links to that, as like, I did that and it works. So, and keeping that memory, and that almost keeps your faith in, doing certain things, because if you weren't mindful, you would forget about it. And then if things go to crap and you're not practicing your tools or not doing what you remember used to work, because if you don't remember it, then you don't really take it on board, then it's kind of like going around in circles, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, some people in this world, and they shall remain nameless, will try and tell you that there is only one way to do things. Well, that is such a crock of shit, excuse me. It is not true. If you find something that works for you and you resonate with it and it gives you joy, it makes you feel good, then go out and do it, and don't let anyone else tell you that it isn't right for you, and it's just like it's the adventure of life to find different things and explore different things and find out what works. And the thing that works for one person doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you. So all these people that are telling you there's only one way to do things, that's their opinion. It's not actually based on any real fact. The only real fact is what works for you, what brings you joy. So life is joy. Life is seeking joy and being happy. And imagine if everybody in this universe or in this world of ours, all they did was seek their own happiness. And if you're truly happy, people say, oh, that's selfish to be happy. That's a load of crap too. So it's not, what do you do when you're happy? Especially as women, we thrive. When we're happy, our environment thrives, our family thrives, our environment thrives, our plants thrive, our goldfish thrive. When we're happy, we have such a effect on our physical environment. We are creators, and we will, so if everybody started out saying, okay, what will make me happy today? And here's a tip. If you have a partner and you're not getting on very well, just turn to your partner and say, what can I do that will make you happy today? And that's something that's really nice to do, and it changes everything.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with being happy. Choose to be happy, and your whole environment will change. Just give yourself permission.
And what we're talking about, you've been publishing for a few years now.
Yes.
And you've got some exciting projects, which I'm really excited about, because I've seen what you've been doing with the Smart Healthy Women?
Smart Healthy Women. So, yeah, I started Smart Healthy Women about 3 years ago. And
wealthy.
we've got about 170 authors and over 500 articles on our site. So that's actually the reason that I put that together. Was I know a lot of coaches and experts who have a lot of good information but not being able to reach an audience that they want. So I had a vision for this global magazine that women could actually contribute their work to, who were working to improving women's lives. So, and that's where that was born. So that's been going for about 3 years. But I've been recently inspired to do a new publishing initiative, which is Practical Woo magazine. So I'm really very much about practical advice, things that work, rapid change. Let's not go through, we're entering we're entering the age now where we can actually, and I don't mean a physical age, but the planetary age, where we're entering where things are happening a lot faster.
Yeah.
So where we used to sit on problems for 20 years and ruminate, try and work them out and finally get, maybe an inch ahead in that problem, now we're able to create instant massive change. And, so practical woo is practical magic strategies, and it's bringing together all the experts who have the information on those strategies and see, I'm losing my words again. I've been talking too much. Strategies and methods and methodologies and things that actually do create rapid change. And, energy work is just because it's that energy that we're talking about. Energy is like you can just change energy by observing it. So when you put your attention on things, you can actually change overnight or in an instant or whatever you decide it is. So it's about bringing all those different ideas, and there's a whole diverse range of energy work that is going on at the moment. And, law of attraction, astrology, tarot, all those sorts of things, asking the question of the moment, the I Ching, different forms of astrology that we have, and everything like that, bringing it together so that you can actually take your pick about what you need to know, what you need a solution for. And then, you're also connected to all these wonderful people who do this work.
So, and it's like very much a logical, practical person. And then for some people, if they didn't know you, to be also incorporating what they think is woo and get out there. But the approaches that you take and the strategies are very logical, well thought out. And, there's even a bit of scientific kind of, we'll try this and see what the reaction is or whatever. But if you also think about what is happening in the world and the understanding and the consciousness of what used to be very out there, woo kind of magic stuff, it's becoming a lot more everyday, more mainstream. People are starting to talk about it openly, and it's bringing together that practicality and the logicality and creating something that people are very much more accepting of than they were like 20 years ago. So
yeah. Well, it will always find its audience, and even back then, 20 years ago, it always found its audience. And it's the people that didn't reject that information or that passion that came through when you discover. I mean, I've always believed in magic, and magic. I mean, everywhere you look, you can see it anyway. And what people traditionally call magic and woo-woo and all that, what we're actually doing is bringing it into the everyday and making sure that people do have access to it. And, the scientific method, even the scientists are coming on board with it. But, if you see the people that, like, if you look at the world at the moment, there's actually a dichotomy, like a very clear dichotomy happening. So if you look at any of the I guess, contentious ideas that are out there, like politics, vaccination, you've got the natural therapies and the allopathic therapies, or the allopathic medicine, and then you've got, the people that have the most to lose are the ones that are trying to, make solid and solidify and concretize information. And I don't think information can or should be concretized, because it changes, like energy, it changes. So what can be true today can be completely opposite tomorrow, and you have to be willing. You don't have to be, but from my perspective, I think it's useful to be willing to see it in that way. But I think the problem with the world is, and with our wiring as humans, is that we are so addicted to certainty and being safe that we forget to live.
Yeah. That brings it down to programming. We're programmed to search out security and safety, because if we don't have that, if we were like the outcasts or those that were out on their own, we weren't within a tribe, we had less success of being able to actually survive, let alone thrive. And that's,
and it's actually, it is hardwired into us. It's hardwired into our amygdala, it's hardwired into our reptilian brain. So we do have, the triunal brain. So our reptilian brain is that fight or flight. So if you are feeling danger, then suddenly, you have to do something about it. So, the whole body physiology changes, getting ready for you to survive. So, that's not even in conscious thought. That's all, that's not neocortex stuff. It's all the primal response in the primal brain. So even though, it's not even that we've been conditioned to it, it's the way that we are actually built from the beginning, because we did start out coming out of the ooze as reptiles, as fish reptiles or whatever. So this is where this reptilian brain comes. Now, I know that a lot of people shudder when they think about that, but really it's a very great leveler when you think that that's how we began. Possibly, and I don't even know that, but possibly that's how we began. But if you think that as a possibility, as a very real possibility, it is still a great leveler. I mean, we didn't land, from the hand of God on here perfectly formed. Everyone's gone through a process. The planet, the people, the animals, and even the stars have gone through a process. Everything has changed and everything is growing towards something more. The universe is growing at an exponential rate. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So why do you want to limit yourself into this little safe box? It doesn't serve you, and nothing ever ends. It always goes on. So, I guess it's the way you look at it. Is life an adventure or is it nothing? Choose.
Yeah, choose. Exactly. So choose happiness. Choose joy.
Yeah. Choose the adventure.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for sharing. Honestly, I enjoy listening to you, so you can talk anytime.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. And I hope that those that are listening really kind of start to question and do their own research and look into what makes them happy, and not just exist. Let's all be happy and find what we enjoy doing and being.
Yeah. Decide that you're going to live your life.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Estelle. And
thanks, darling.
I'm going to sign out. So thanks everyone for watching, and I hope you enjoyed my interview. I'm Alexis with Estelle. She's fabulous, and there'll be some details if you want to check out what she's up to. So thanks for listening.